Right. Hey everyone. Sorry for all that confusion. This is my first time using YouTube and got a little ahead of myself. But we're good to go now. Glad you guys made it. So we are going to jump in pretty quick, but before we do, I wanted to just show you guys a few resources that I have that I really like, that I would recommend. Because one of the things about figure drawing is it's different for each person that's drawing. You go to different teachers, you read different books, and they're all going to tell you different things. So it's a good idea, if this is something that you really want to do, to look at different media and different ways of doing things, and then use all of those as sort of an arsenal for you to do your figure drawing. So I've just got 3 books that I really like. The first one I'm going to show you here is Figure Drawing for Design and Invention by Michael Hampton. What I really like about this book is he shows all of the muscle and anatomy and bone structure, but he does it in a really simplified, easy to digest way. So instead of getting all the sinew and tendons and all of the muscles that we don't really need as artists, he just breaks down the body into really simple shapes. So the pectoral muscle is just sort of this fish, and the deltoid is just sort of this triangle, instead of getting super complicated with it. In contrast to that, another person I feel like you ought to look at is Bridgman. So this is a copy of Bridgman's Complete Guide to Drawing from Life. This book itself has a really interesting history, but when you look at the work that Bridgman does, you can see that he's a lot more organic in his movement. Not everything is so finished or finite. The shapes are really moldable and changeable. So Bridgman's figures are going to be so different from the way Michael Hampton does his. And then the last one I'm going to show you is maybe a little less popular. This is Drawing the Head and Figure by Jack Ham. And I imagine that he is pulling a lot from Andrew Loomis, but I really like this book because it appeals to my particular aesthetic. I really like mid-century illustration and advertising illustration, and this is the style that he is doing. And so you can see that the way he does his structure and line art is going to be a lot more stylized, but into this particular style where it's sort of based on the types of things that, say, Bridgman was doing, but it's much more clean. You look at it and you immediately can tell that it's from American mid-century. So if that's the style that you want to go after, look at the artists who do that style, and then copy them. All right. So those are just a few books that I have. I've got a lot more that maybe I can go in a little bit more depth to or talk about in later weeks. But for today, why don't we get started? So we are going to be drawing Eileen Elma today, which I'm really excited about. Her Instagram handle is Fox Priestess. If you'd like to look her up on Instagram, she's fantastic. So for my tools right now, all I'm using is just a charcoal pencil. And I've got my eye on the chat, so if you have any questions as we go along, I encourage you to ask them. But we're going to start off with just 30 seconds. So we're going to have 30 seconds to do a gesture drawing. And if you were here last week, you remember, or 2 weeks ago, gesture drawing is just going to be a simple stick figure. So I'm basically taking the major forms of the body head, rib cage, pelvis, legs, feet, arms, and hands. And I'm going to pose this sort of stick figure in all sorts of different ways. All right, so here we go. I think we're going to do 10 or so, maybe a little more. These are just 30 seconds long. So this is actually very close to what we just drew. So I want you to pay attention to Eileen's proportions. This is a really balanced pose. And gesture drawing is just as much about warming up as it is about anything. So don't feel frustrated, okay? So here now we get into some movement. I'm going to start off with an action line, and I like to make a couple lines that sort of represent the pose as a whole. Did I miss it? I'm thinking about the body structure. But more than anything, I'm trying to make a statement about what is happening right here in the moment. So if these don't end up completely anatomically correct, I'm not so worried about that. I'm more worried about trying to capture this energy. So for example, the coiled energy of this pose here, or the graceful energy of this one. So for this pose, she's obviously got her weight more on one foot than the other. So my first lines is this action line here of her spine and then that foot. And I'm thinking about how her hips, her shoulders are tilted in different ways. Her arms are crossed in front of her. And then this leg back here is sort of free. And here again, this is a really balanced pose, but she's on one foot, so I just have this one curved line. And I'm marking her shoulders and her hips. That leg. Her arms. Her head. I want you to notice how I'm holding my pencil too, like this instead of like this. That's so I can get a full range of motion with my arm. These are some really awesome poses from Aileen. As you're gesture drawing, I encourage you to stretch a little bit. So try something maybe you're not totally used to, or focus on a part of the body that you are afraid of. Or something I like to do is try and do the entire pose without stopping. So I don't pick up my pencil at any point. I just drag it across the paper so I can really feel energized in the pose. Or the opposite of that, we've got 30 seconds. Maybe I try and draw the pose in as few lines as possible. So instead of getting really energized, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I count my lines. 6, 7, and see if I can 8, 9, 10. Okay, so maybe that's not a perfect drawing, but I'm counting my lines because I'm trying to make every single line count. So as I was saying before, when we look at different artists, they draw in different ways. We don't want to get stuck just drawing one way. I've run out of room. Go back up here. Gesture drawing is a time to be free and relax. Okay, boom. So there's all our gesture drawings. How'd you guys do? Good, I hope. All right, so what we're gonna do now is just move into 1 minute. So with 1 minute, it's double the amount of time. I always tell my students, I want you to spend not more time drawing, but try and spend some more time thinking. I'm going to zoom out the camera a little bit here. Instead of spending more time drawing with those extra 30 seconds, try and spend a little bit more time thinking and measuring. Here we go. We'll do 30 seconds starting now. Okay, so for this first pose, do an action line, feet, and I'm noticing that her feet are right underneath her shoulders. Okay, and I'm thinking about these relationships between these three major forms. Are they on top of each other? Are they overlapping? Are they touching? Try not to block. I'm drawing kind of small, smaller than maybe I would if I was not on stream, because I want you guys to be able to see everything. But I recommend that this is about as small, like as big as your hand. I'd say that's probably about as small as you want to go. If you go much smaller, I feel like you get kind of caught. So here's an example where this pose is really stretched. This is a very interesting pose with the real compression on this side of her body and the real stretch on this side of her body. So I want to make sure that I get that in there. So as I'm drawing, having a bit of a dialogue with myself. Is the arm in front? Is the bottom part of the arm moving towards me or away from me? Can this be better represented with a straight line or a curved line? This is fun. It's like a progression here. Oh, this is turning out a little wonky. Okay, so with something like this, a compressed pose, where she's not on her feet, I might think as much about kind of a big shape as I do about each individual limb. So in this case, she's kind of a triangle like this. So I want to make sure, or by thinking about it in that way, in geometric terms, it can really help not to get lost in the pose. And at this point, I'm not worried about rendering. I'm not worried about details like her tattoos or even her hair. I'm just trying to understand the pose in three-dimensional space. Trying to understand how are these shapes stacking on each other. It's gone now, but I'm gonna finish up there. So I'm trying to think, how are these three-dimensional shapes stacking on each other? What's in front of what? Because when we get into rendering and into shadow, that's going to be really important. So for now, I'm just trying to think, okay, I've got these three forms. So like take this one, for example. I've got this form here. And I'm thinking, if this was a box, I'd see the underside of the box a little bit, and it would be faced this direction like that. And then if this were a box, I'd be seeing the top of that box. And it's faced that direction like that. And if this were a box, maybe it would be like this. I'm going to change this box. So I'm thinking of the torso in terms of where's the front of the torso, where's the side of the torso, where's the top of the torso, where's the bottom of the torso, where's the side of the hips, where's the front of the hips. Right, I'm trying to think of this in three-dimensional space. And the more I can get used to thinking of it in three-dimensional space, the easier it's going to be to render and change. Right, so let's move on to 3 minutes. Gonna get clean paper here. And again, if I'm going too quick about anything or you have anything to say, you want to tell me what music you're listening to right now, feel free to speak up in the comments. All right, let's go for 3 minutes. Okay, I'm starting with structure. I've only got 3 minutes. It's not that much time, but I do have a little bit more time to slow down and think and to measure. So I'm still starting with the gesture type structure. Thinking about the tilt of her hips, tilt of her shoulders. As I'm drawing her leg, I'm thinking about how do these curves interact with one another. There's this long sloping curve versus the sharp curve of her thigh. So I'm drawing this leg, I'm thinking, is the calf in front of the quads, or are the quads in front of the calf? And again, there's lots of different ways to approach a drawing. You know, you could approach the same pose in 5 or 6 different ways. For me, I'm dealing more with angles and structure because I'm trying to think about kind of the most easiest way to understand the drawing process. That's what I'm going for. Easiest way to